Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the workbench. Dan here as always, and I got another weathering video for you guys, and this one is a customer request. I don't normally do customer videos like this by request. However, this one was requested to me by the individual who's trying to learn some basic weathering techniques right now. And so I just went ahead and just said I would go ahead and do this. So I got this car here, which is the first one I'm going to be doing. I got two cars. But we'll do the other one later. This is NS 655888, and this is one of the newer 60-foot releases from Athearn RTR line. It's a very well detailed model right out of the box. These look very good weathered up. Our prototype is pretty simple. It's just a little bit faded, and it has some graffiti and some minor washes. So this should be a pretty easy car to do. The hardest part will be the graffiti, and I'll go ahead and show you guys the prototype photos right now so you guys can see what we're dealing with. So the major noticeable thing here about this car at first glance here is that you can see it's a little bit faded, and this is a normal thing that these oxide red box cars will do out in the basically normal weather conditions. They usually fade pretty quickly. This is a relatively fresh repaint. This was only done in, I think, 2008, so it's not too old, but the paint has faded a little bit. So the first task here is going to be trying to match this color. Now, in this particular case, it's a very light reddish color here, and I want to achieve this by spraying some white onto the model. Now that'll be the first step. The second step here will be to paint the graffiti, and the reason being because the graffiti on this side of the car is somewhat weathered over, and I want to basically weather over it once I get it all painted. You can see it's not too complex, though it will take a little bit of time to fill in, and we got to work around the complex door track area around these bars. We've got some crappier graffiti here and some graffiti right here as well, some smaller tags. The opposite side is pretty much just plain. There's no graffiti, so it's literally just this repeated on the opposite side, so that will be really easy, but this is probably the hardest side. But again, pretty basic piece of rolling stock in that respect. So the first step here is to match that faded color that is on the prototype, and this is something I've done on many of my box cars thus far, and it's a very simple technique. And again, I'll refer to my airbrushing work here. I'm using Anita's white acrylic, and you can see I've put just a little bit in my dispenser cup here, and I use 71 or 70% isopropyl alcohol to dilute this. Never anything over that because it can tend to strip the paint or damage decals, so just 70% is what I recommend for this. I fill the cap with a little bit of this rubbing alcohol. You can see just how much, and then I start mixing the paint together. And you want to make sure you really mix this thoroughly, that way everything is well blended and you don't get clumps, because you definitely don't want clumps shooting out in your airbrush. Now usually what I'll do is I'll mix this together really well, and I'll usually mix it with an older paintbrush like this, because I like the fact that you can use the bristles to really scrub and work the paint into the cap, and it takes care of any clumps or anything like that. So once I've gotten the paint mixed up, basically what I'll do is I'll take it, hook it up to my airbrush, spray it, and see what kind of a pattern I get. If I get more clumps or anything like that, I'll basically dilute it just a little bit more. But this should be good right here. You can see that consistency is about like skim milk. It's very thin. This is the consistency you generally want to aim for when you do a fade mix, a weathering mix, anything like that on your models. For the fade here, I'm just taking my airbrush. I got this hooked up at 60 psi, and I'm going to be spraying a pretty light coat of this fade mix across the top of the car and working my way down. Make sure this is as even as possible, and go slowly. This color will build up pretty quick, and in this case the model's not too faded, but I just want to represent the base fade color. Later on I'm going to wet wash some red on this to get the color that we need, but for now this is the white coat. We're going to go ahead and seal up our model with Tester's Dull Coat here. This is what I use for all my models. And with Tester's Dull Coat, all you got to do with any other rattle can is just shake it up for about 2 minutes and you're good to go. Do a couple quick test sprays on a box to make sure you don't have any chunks or any globs of clear coat clogging up your tip, and then you just spray. And you do very quick, thin, even coats. Now it's in the middle of the winter time here and it's pretty cold out, so usually what I'll do when it's cold out, in this case, is I'll take the clear coat, I'll dip it in some hot water for about 5 minutes, let it soak, pull it back out, and then shake it, and that helps to build the pressure in the can. Usually when it's cold out, it doesn't do as well, and it sprays a little bit more tacky because it's cold. So keep that in mind. So with this again, just do quick, even coats. I'm going to try to do this without getting my head and my only lighting down here. Do 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats. 1 on the roof, 2 on each end, just like that. On to the color transitioning. Now I'm not going to dwell on this too much, it's very basic and there's a multitude of ways you can do this. One way you can do it, if you wanted to avoid having to do this by hand with brush techniques, you could spray a light clay colored acrylic on the sides as long as it matches what you saw in that prototype photo. But in this particular case, my method to do this, and I've done it again on multiple cars, is to first base coat the car in white so that you fade the base color down, and then you follow behind with a little bit of red and earth brown. In this case I'm using Anita's earth brown and I'm using True Red. So I got the caps here and I'm going to be using a large fan brush here, a soft bristle brush, great for applying washes. Now what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of red and lay it out on my brush like that. I'll then take the majority of which will be brown and I'll transfer that to my paper. Now I really want to focus more on this brown color, so I'm really going to be going more for the browns here. So I'm just going to load some of that paint in my bristles, and I got my mixing bowl and I'll take some of this, load it up in my bristles like this, and transfer it to the model. With this I'm just going for a thin application of paint across the car. Notice I have not masked anything up. I'm just putting this on the car, spreading it evenly around, and I'm getting it in all of the nooks and crannies as well, but I'm not applying too much pressure. Now after you've applied this wash, it'll look a little bit red at first. It might look a little bit too red, a little bit too vibrant, but just be patient with this because once it dries it'll be a very flat finish and it'll look a lot more realistic. After it dries it'll look something like this. I've already applied it to this side and you can see on this side we now have that brownish red tinted color. It looks very faded, it's very even and flat on the sides of the car, and it's very effective on these bright red colored boxcars for the weathering tone. So I'm going to let all this dry up. I am not going to clear coat this. I'm going to move into the graffiti right after all this dries. This will serve as a nice flat coat for all the next weathering steps. Now that we got the color transitions done, we need to go ahead and clean off the rest of this lettering. You can see I already started by cleaning off the reporting marks and number and plate F and then the lube stencil here in the corner. But we need to go ahead and hit up all of this data, and I'm going to be using a micro brush to do this, which is very simple. All you got to do is take the car, keep it flat. I have a little napkin in the corner here that I'm going to use, and I have my micro brush. I'm just going to get it wet. I'm going to pat it off a little bit, and then basically what you do is you take your micro brush, and if I zoom in here, you just rub it over the surface of your lettering like this very carefully. Now, because the lettering and the graphics are raised on the car, you won't dig into that paint. That being said though, you need to make sure that you're only very lightly brushing the data. It'll take the paint off the data first before it takes it off the car body side, but you still got to be a little bit careful because you can still scrub that paint off, and we don't want any discoloration areas. So you got to work a bit quick and slow at the same time. I know it's kind of contradictory sounding, but this is the best way to do it. And just take your time, like I said, and try not to take too much of that paint off underneath. But as you can see, if you go slow enough, you can take that paint off the lettering and it doesn't take the paint off around it, and now we have clean data once again. So I'm going to go ahead and do this for the entire car. Okay, so I've been working on the graffiti now for a little while, and I have to apologize. I was going to film most of this stuff coming into the project, but unfortunately I started doing all of this work while I had the camera in front of me like it is right now, pointed down at the car, and as I started working, at some point in time the camera's memory filled up and it cut off and it stopped recording. And the recording icon, it would be right up here in the corner of my screen. It's very small, and so every time I was glancing over at my monitor really fast as I was working on the car, I didn't see that the record button wasn't indicating anymore and that it had stopped recording. So I ended up spending quite some time going through all of this fine detail work, thinking I was filming it, and I wasn't, and I'm very disappointed about that. But basically what I've done so far was I copied the first couple tags and the small tags, the basic outline work. I made some acrylic mixed colors and applied that, did some washes to build that up, and then did the crappy graffiti here, the crappy graffiti there, some small tags there, and a small tag in this corner. So to redeem myself here, I'm going to go ahead and try to film the last tag here, which is on the side of the car. As you can see in this corner, this is what we've got done so far. All of this work on this side and on the door is done. The last graffiti tag we need to do is this one right here, which is pretty basic, but it's still a little bit complex, and I want to try to get it right. So I'm going to be replicating that again to the best of my ability here, and I'll show you guys how to do this. Now, obviously with graffiti, some people hate it, some people like it, some people love it. In the particular, I love graffiti, but I don't like having to replicate it sometimes. However, you got to start somewhere. You got to do it in most cases. You know, this stuff isn't easy. But for any of you who are trying to get started in graffiti, you got to start somewhere, and I'll try to help you out as best as I can here. The best way to get going in graffiti is to, of course, practice on pieces of paper by maybe just looking at some pictures of graffiti online, and then just seeing if you can draw it out on a piece of paper with a mechanical pencil, a pen, and just getting a basic idea of outlines, shapes, styles, colors, stuff like that. You know, getting used to the feels and patterns, and then once you've gotten that information, you translate it to, well, how can I paint this now on a model? Obviously with a boxcar like this too, you got a lot of stuff to work around, ribs and things like that, but I'll do my best to show you guys what I do for this, and hopefully you guys can learn from this. So I start by taking a mechanical pencil, and basically in this case I'll make a rough outline of the graffiti tag, very roughly I might add again, and this is just to give me the basic idea and layout of where everything's going to go on this car. So I'm just taking this and copying all of this down, and these are just rough scales. These are not perfect by any means. These are just giving me a basic idea of where everything's landing on this car so that it's somewhat accurate. And so I just do this, and it only takes a few minutes, but I recommend that you do this, especially if you're just learning to do graffiti. Try this out. It really does help. Just a note, make sure you avoid using markers, pens, or anything like that that might stain. A pencil, you can paint over this very quickly and it won't bleed through. Pens, you have to watch, because a pen, the ink will bleed through the acrylic very quickly. So you got to watch that. A mechanical pencil is always the best way to go, and try to keep as sharp a tip as possible as well. Now that I got my outlines done, I'm going to go ahead and fill in all this. And I'm using acrylic paints. I'm using a little bit of buff and green, and a Citadel, or excuse me, not a Citadel, an Atlas number 155 brush here to fill in all of the graffiti. All you got to do is take it in your outlines like this with the paint. This is a little bit thinned down with some water, and you can see it spreads pretty well. But just take your time with this, go slowly. If you need to do multiple coats, you can. In this case, this graffiti is pretty old, so I'm going to be just relying on one coat. I want this to look pretty weathered anyway, so I'm just going to be taking my time with this, and I'll come back and show you guys what this looks like when it's all filled in. Here we have the main graffiti tags painted in. Now it's time to fill it in, and this is the part that can be a little bit challenging. And I like to use an extremely sharp, brand new number 1055 for this. This works the best. You can see how sharp the tip on this thing is. This is only for doing fine lines on graffiti. Now other tools you can use are micron pens, for example, fine tip Sharpies, paint pens, things like that. There's all kinds of different products you can use, and I'm going to be using a combination of these and hand painting to do this. Now the best way to do it is to take your acrylic, in this case black acrylic, to do the outline, and I like to just take the stuff straight from the cap like this. First I'll wet the tip like that to make sure it's nice and sharp, and then I'll just come in here, pick up a little paint, but only on the tip. We only need paint on the tip, okay? That's very important. And then once we've done that, then we can come in and we'll start painting the outlines. When you're doing this, you want to go a little bit slow here. You want to really take your time and make sure you're not screwing something up. You definitely don't want to have to do this multiple times, but you can see if you take your time and do it carefully, you can get some pretty convincing effects. And that very fine tip brush is also very, very handy for this.